ago, we discussed what happened to fan favourite characters Lyonel Baratheon and Raymun Fossoway after the events of Ashford Meadow, as seen in the Hedge Knight and thus Season 1 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. In this week's video, I want to take a look at some of the other standout characters and what their future, or lack of future, holds. For most of these characters, given the standalone nature of the novellas, we sadly won't actually be seeing them again, unless Ira Parker changes things when bringing the books to life. In this video in particular, I really want to focus on Aerion, Daeron, and Valarr Targaryen, as well as Tanselle and Steely Pate, who I must say endeared himself to many fans, a lot more than I could have predicted given his small role in the story. The young prince's horse was black as night, to match the colour of his armour, lance and shield and trappings. Atop his helm was a gleaming three-headed dragon, wings spread, enamelled in rich red. Its twin was painted upon a glossy black surface on his shield. The thoughts of Duncan the Tall on Valarr Targaryen, the Hedge Knight. I want to start this video with Prince Valarr Targaryen, the eldest son of Prince Baelor Breakspear and his wife, the Lady Jenna Dondarrion. Valarr was said to have a strong resemblance to his father Baelor, though he was shorter, slimmer, and more traditionally handsome. The young prince had brown hair marked with a streak of silver gold with blue eyes, very striking, standing out against other Targaryens as a result. Unlike his father, celebrated as one of the most formidable warriors in the realm, Valarr possessed only modest skill in the joust, but did not dishonour himself and gave a good showing. In tourneys, Valarr wore black armour and wielded a black lance. His horse likewise was black, along with all its trappings. Something not clearly addressed in the show is that Valarr was married to Kira of Tyrosh, and you can see her with Valarr in the background of some shots. They had several sons, but were all sadly stillborn. Valarr was named as one of the original champions for Lord Ashford's daughter at the opening of the tourney at Ashford Meadow, yet his rank as a Targaryen prince, grandson to King Daeron II, and a future king, meant he was shielded from most of the dangerous opponents. Over the course of the first day's tilts, he won at least 9 jousts against what were described as undistinguished foes. Amongst them, Sir Abler Hightower and Lord Garwin Swan, and he remained one of the champions when the day's contests closed. When Sir Duncan the Tall faced a trial of 7, Valarr's father, Baelor Breakspear, came forward as the 7th knight to fight on Duncan's side. As Baelor had not intended to compete in the tourney, he had not brought his armour with him to Ashford, and instead borrowed Valarr's. Thus, when Baelor first rode onto the field clad in the prince's armour, Dunk initially believed it was Valarr who had come to champion him. It is speculated that given Baelor was wearing his son's armour, which was too small for him, is what allowed the blow by Maekar to the back of the head to be so devastating. There was not enough space inside the helm, thus Baelor's skull took the full force of the blow, and he was slain. Valarr later kept vigil by his father's body at the funeral. When Duncan approached to offer his condolences, Valarr curtly dismissed him. At his father's death, Valarr became his grandfather's heir and Prince of Dragonstone. Valarr would be heir for a very short time, as he died in King's Landing in 209 AC from the Great Spring Sickness, as did his younger brother Mataris, and their grandfather, King Daeron II. Thus did Daeron's second son, Aerys, very unexpectedly become king. I think it's very unlikely we will ever see Valarr again on screen, given he would be dead by the time Season 2 of the show takes place. Never you mind that one, sir. All he does is drink and talk about his dreams. An innkeeper to Duncan the Tall on Daeron Targaryen, the Hedge Knight. In many ways, the fate of Daeron Targaryen is just as tragic as Valarr, but for very different reasons. Daeron plays such a key role in the story of the Hedge Knight, given it was he whom Egg had run away from, and Daeron's lie about Dunk kidnapping him, adding more charges to Dunk's so-called crimes at Ashford. The difference between Daeron and Aerion is Daeron knows his lie was wrong, and apologised to Dunk for it, taking a fall during the first charge of the Trial of 7. In the end, it proved the slightly more honourable thing to do. Something that always puzzled me is the fact it is well known that Daeron was not much of a knight, so it seemed very odd to me that Maekar would make his son take part in the Trial of Seven in the first place. But I guess Daeron is technically one of the accusers. Like Aerion, he could be obliged to take part. The drunken aspect of Daeron's character is at his core. It defines what happened at Ashford. But unlike many of the other drunks we see in George R. R. Martin's stories, Daeron is not drinking for pleasure. He is not a joyous drunk. He's solemn, and using drink as a way of hiding from his dragon dreams. Daeron seems to be one of the very rare Targaryen dragon dreamers, and as we see at Ashford, his dreams do seem to come true in a manner. It very much seems like these dreams deeply troubled Daeron, with him using drinking as a way to escape and cope. When Maekar ascends to the throne in 221 AC, after the death of King Aerys, who had no living heirs, this made Daeron the Prince of Dragonstone an heir to the Iron Throne, though he preferred to be called Prince of Summerhall, as he considered Dragonstone such a gloomy abode. Daeron's brother Raymun served as his maester for a while. We know at some point between 209 and 222 AC, Daeron married Kira of Tyrosh, the widow of his cousin Prince Valarr. Their daughter Princess Valarr was born in 222 AC and proved to be a sweet but a simple-minded girl. Daeron died sometime before 233 AC, reputedly from a pox he caught from a whore. His brother Raymun claimed the dreams of dragons plagued Daeron and eventually led to his death. Daeron dying before his father was a great part in what led to the succession crisis after Maekar's death, which had to be resolved by the Great Council of 233 AC. It is possible that we could see Daeron again in the future. He does not appear in the Sworn Sword and the Mystery Knight, but I could see a circumstance where Daeron could make an appearance in later seasons of the show, should Ira Parker decide to take the show past the published novellas, using George R. R. Martin's outlines or perhaps his own ideas. I think the best way you could implement him would be in a situation where Dunk and Egg travel to Summerhall, where we know Daeron has spent much of his time, or maybe even King's Landing. There is so much we don't know about the adventures of Dunk and Egg. There are several ways you could bring him back. While I'm not a huge fan of this idea, I can see Ira Parker wanting to build upon the Dragon Dreams aspect of Daeron's character. Aerion is quite the monster. He thinks he's a dragon in human form, you know. That's why he was so wroth at the puppet show. A pity he wasn't born a Fossoway. Then he'd think himself an apple and we'd all be a deal safer. But there you are, Daeron Targaryen to Duncan the Tall on Aerion Targaryen, the Hedge Knight. Aerion Targaryen is instrumental in the events that transpired at Ashford. His actions, his attack on the puppeteers and Tanselle, directly sets off a chain reaction that leads to Dunk's Trial of Seven, and thus the death of Baelor Breakspear, which you could argue in turn indirectly leads to the downfall of House Targaryen itself. Aerion was one of the most outstanding examples of the madness that can afflict members of House Targaryen. Although he was well-rounded and a skilled knight, Aerion was capricious, cruel and arrogant, even thinking he was a dragon in human form. Much of this can be seen in his relationship with Egg, and how he effectively bullied him his whole life, so much so, making extreme threats of violence towards him. When you look at this in the wider context of Aerion's actions at Ashford, it's very easy to understand why he reacted the way he did to the Dornish puppeteers. He was already a very cruel and violent man. Add in the fact he believed himself a dragon in human form. Seeing the puppeteers attacking the effigy of a dragon, to him is not only seeing an attack on House Targaryen, but Aerion personally. Hence, when Aerion is questioned by his father and uncle, he stands by and justifies his actions. An aspect of the TV adaptation I think worked really well for Aerion as a character is how Daeron talks about Aerion as a child, how he was once a happy boy and liked fishing, before being moulded into the kind of man he became by the very virtue of his privileged position. After the conclusion of the tourney at Ashford, Maekar sent Aerion to Lys, in the hopes that a few years in the Free Cities would change him for the better. But the reality is, if Maekar knew the first thing about Lys, for Aerion it would be a playground of depravity. Aerion remained in Lys for several years. We cannot say for how long exactly. According to some sources, he may have fathered numerous bastard children during his time there, and it's possible that their descendants still live in the city. While in exile, Aerion is also said to have served for a time with the Second Sons, the famed sellsword company. At some point he returned to Westeros and took part in the Third Blackfyre Rebellion in 219 AC, where he carried out what's described as certain deeds that became well known. However, George R. R. Martin has yet to really flesh out the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, so we cannot say for sure what these deeds were, good or bad. There is some suggestion he did something of great valour during the battle. After Sir Aegor Rivers was captured, the man who was effectively the mastermind of the continued Blackfyre threat, Aerion and the Hand of the King, Brynden Rivers, urged King Aerys to have him executed on the spot, but the king instead chose to send Bittersteel to the Night's Watch. Aerion and Bloodraven would end up vindicated when Aegor managed to escape en route to the Watch. According to some sources, sometime after the death of Prince Daeron, Aerion was named Prince of Dragonstone by his father. However, it is not clear, given we don't actually know when Daeron died, when this could have been, and how long he was Prince of Dragonstone for. It could have been years or a few months. Aerion was married to his cousin, Daeron Targaryen, and the two had a son, ominously named Maegor, born in the year 232 AC. In that same year, however, Aerion died in a drunken folly after drinking a cup of wildfire convinced it would transform him into a dragon. He died screaming. If Ira Parker decides to take the show past the published books, I do think we will see Aerion on screen again for 3 key reasons. The Third Blackfyre Rebellion, in which Aerion seemingly played a huge role, is a prime era of history I could see George setting an adventure in, or at the very least, a topic I could see Ira Parker being able to flesh out on his own with the help of George. My preference is to only adapt the written novellas, but I think given interviews with George, Ira, and statements by HBO, there is at very least a desire to use, at the very least, George's outlines for future novellas. Steely Pate became a popular character among fans. He was always generally well liked in regards to his role in the book. His wholesome portrayal in the TV show has brought a lot more attention to the character. He played a key role in Dunk's story at Ashford. He sold Dunk his armour for a very reasonable price, and even reinforced his shield for only a copper. A great act of kindness. The smith accompanied Dunk to the trial of 7, helping him on with his armour, and tried to help the mortally wounded Prince Baelor after the battle. When Dunk lost his armour, sword and horse, when he lost to Sir Uther Underleaf in the wedding tourney at White Walls, Uther dismissed the quality of the armour, but Duncan defended it, saying it was made by Steely Pate. Later, Duncan paid his ransom to Uther, with gold loaned to him by Lord Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven. I think sadly it's unlikely we will ever see Steely Pate again, but I could maybe see a scenario in which he could be at the White Walls tourney, selling his wares. But again, who knows what George has planned in the outlines. I think if Ira Parker wanted to, he could find a way to make it work, to bring him back in a post-novella season. Tanselle is another character whose role in the story was expanded upon very well in the TV show, which was vital given how important Dunk's crush on Tanselle is to his character, with it being his driving motivation for attacking Aerion at Ashford. I think, however, even if it wasn't Tanselle being attacked by Aerion, Dunk, being the kind of man he was, the kind of knight he was, would have intervened regardless, because it was the right thing to do. After the attack by Aerion, Tanselle and her troop leave Ashford heading for home for Dawn. Tanselle leaves Dunk's painted shield in the care of Steely Pate. According to him, Tanselle's uncle felt that it would be better off well gone and well forgotten, and that it would not be good for her to see Dunk die in his trial of 7. It seems that looking for Tanselle was part of the reason why Dunk was so keen to explore Dawn after the events of the Hedge Knight. Between the end of the Hedge Knight and the beginning of the Sworn Sword, Dunk and Egg travel through Dawn in search for Tanselle. The journey takes them by way of the Prince's Pass, Vaith and the Greenblood, as well as Plankytown. Along the way, they attend 100 puppet shows, hoping to find her, but by the time they depart Dawn, Dunk abandons the search, and even stops speaking of her. It's never made clear entirely whether they even found Tanselle, but it is suggested they did not. Dunk later reflects that he ought to be dreaming of Tanselle rather than Rowan Webber, and remembers that the two of them never so much as touched or even shared the most chaste kiss. Later at the wedding feast, during the first night of the White Walls tourney, Dunk wonders where Tanselle might be that night, and if she ever thinks of him. He falls asleep at the table and has pleasant dreams involving Tanselle. I'm really 50-50 as to if we might see Tanselle on screen again. To bring her back would be a big change from the novellas. Much like Pate, there's maybe ways that George has worked it into the outlines for future novellas, and who knows what Ira Parker could do after season 3. Now, I do think there is a chance we could see Tanselle in season 2 of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. We know that Dunk and Egg spend a lot of time in Dorne, and they do look for her. I suspect given they are going to have to flesh out the story of the Sworn Sword, the same way they did with the Hedge Knight, Ira Parker could achieve this by including an episode set in Dorne, or some extended flashbacks of Dunk and Egg's time there, kind of what they did with the flashbacks of Dunk and Sir Arlen during season 1. In the same way I suspect we should get a Maester Aemon cameo in season 2, given we know Dunk and Egg meet him in Old Town, something I don't think Ira Parker or George could resist. I could maybe see them including a Tanselle cameo in Dorne as well. Maybe Dunk and Egg are at a puppet show, and as they are walking away, we see a shot of Tanselle. Maybe she could call out to Dunk, but because of the noise of the crowd or something, they don't hear her. They could very well try and give some more closure and have Dunk actually find her. It's part of the nature of the Dunk and Egg novellas that each story is enclosed on its own, and with each new story we also get a new set of characters to fall in love with. The same way fans have fallen in love with so many of the characters from season 1, fans will find new characters to fall in love with in season 2. But given the nature of adaptations and the prospects of the show going past the published novellas, who can really say if we could see the likes of these characters again?